The next part is to add the mushroom steps. But before I do that, I like to go ahead and put my name on the bottom of the piece because that way it's already there and it helps me orient where the front of my piece is going to be. So what I did is I used some clay that was in my bag of scraps that I had made handles for the mugs that I had made a few days ago. And it's been wrapped in plastic, but it's stiffer than clay that had just come out of the bag. Because this has already reached leather hard, so if I were to put fresh clay, there's a different moisture variance between the fresh clay and this clay here. So I decided to use clay that was scraps because it's been sitting for a while. And I took it and I laid it out because it was all had been run through my slab roller, and I just took some round biscuit cutters that I have and cut out half circles, and they ended up like this. They still have the texture from the canvas, and I'm just going to take my fingers and I'm just going to rub that out. I'm not looking for perfection because these are the mushrooms that are growing on the side of the stump. Then I took the edge and just flattened it out just a little bit so that you have this rounded area. Get a little water on my fingers. Clay will zap the moisture from your skin. You don't want too much water because then it becomes really sticky, but if you get just a little bit, it helps your hands glide across the surface of it. Now I'm going to take the edge that's going to be attached to the actual tree trunk and figure out how to design that so that it's going to fit with the roundness of that. Next, before I put it on, because it is a mushroom, I'm going to take my stylus tool and I'm going to put the gills on the bottom of it. Again, not worrying about the extra bits of clay. Most of these you wouldn't be able to see anyway once the steps are in, but once the piece is dry, you can just take a little brush and you can just brush them right off. Otherwise, if you try to do it while the clay is still wet, you're going to push it back into the grooves that you've just created. So let me turn this guy to where you can see it. And this is going to go right here. I'm also going to take this stylus, also known as a pencil, and draw a line underneath my mushroom. That lets me know where I need to score the clay in order to make them marry. I have this little tool. I think it's just a potter's scoring tool. I don't know the official name of it. I tried to find it out because my mom asked me what it's called, and I really honestly don't know. It has multiple wires. You can use a needle tool to score, or a metal rib sometimes will have a serrated edge. But I really like this thing because I was fortunate when I purchased my first wheel. I was purchasing it from a lady who was retiring from pottery, and she gave me all of her tools, and she gave me a kiln. And I didn't know that when I went to pick up the wheel. She just gave me everything that she had used in her studio, and I was eternally grateful, and still am, for her investing in some unknown person. This is a slip that I made from my clay body. It's actually the dregs from my bucket when I throw, because clay ends up in that water and it makes a really good attachment slip. This is just a paintbrush, getting a little bit wet, smoothing things out, making sure it's stuck on there pretty good. I like to use a paintbrush to, I don't like how that looks, so I'm going to bend it just a little bit, make it a little rounder on the top because it was starting to push in because I was applying too much pressure. As I was saying, I like to use a paintbrush to go in and remove my fingerprints and any small blemishes that I can. Getting the excess slip, because you don't want any extra moisture if you can help it, because that'll cause it to dry slower than the rest of it. However, it is going to go under one of those cloches, so it'll slow the drying time down. As you can tell, I've added the rest of the stepping or stair mushrooms, and it doesn't matter how you layer them as long as you kind of make them look like stairs. The last thing that I want to add to this is a mailbox, because this little fairy house is owned by some fairy. So I just took a couple scraps of clay, made some shapes. I need to figure out where to cut this so that it's the right height. That looks about right. Going to attach this to the box first, just to make it easier to line the pieces up. I cut the back half of my mailbox off also so that there's not so much clay there. I like to, as I said earlier, use a paintbrush as much as I possibly can in the creating stage to clean up lines, extra slip, everything that I can to make it look as finished as possible while everything is wet. I don't like to have to come back and sand or touch dry clay. Dry clay particles aren't good for your lungs, and if I can avoid them, I do. So I'm just scoring this really good, taking some of my slip, a little too much, adding it to my little mailbox. I did add a little bit of a wood grain texture to the post. I have I think it's a fondant tool that makes wood grain texture. So I like to, I just took a couple extra scraps of clay because I like detail. Now, this is the base to a fairy house. However, if you didn't want to create a fairy house, it could be a riser for something else. It would also make a very whimsical candle stand, because you could put a 4-inch candle on this. The other thing I made for my little fairy house is a little flag for the mailbox. It's almost a little too dry because I forgot to cover it back up with the plastic. So what I'm going to do is just dip it in some water, let it set for just a second, let the clay absorb a little bit so it'll stick better. There we go. I didn't put it above the top of the mailbox because that's a point where it could actually break off. I don't like to do little tiny pieces above the edges. So there we go. And I am going to add a name to my mailbox because I already know the little fairy in my life that this one is going to belong to once it's complete.